Peter, again, thank you so much for being with us. It means so much. We are here tonight because of David Rockefeller. And, you know, he was the one who had the vision to found this organization in 1965. And David was the grandson of John D. Rockefeller. He was a banker, but he was so much more. He was a patron of the arts. Can you tell us, why was it that he took such an interest in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, first of all. And I live in upstate New York now, where it hasn't rained in 3 months. So, well, I could live without the snow, but the rain is desperately needed up there. David was, for those of you, I noticed a lot of very young people in the room, was one of what were known as the famous 5 Rockefeller brothers. He was the youngest in the family. There was also one sister. They were very prominent, played a great role in American politics, obviously in the American economy, but they were schooled to be sort of responsible. David told me once, his father, John D. Rockefeller Jr., met with his sons every morning at breakfast. And he usually had a couple of Bible verses or a little story that they were supposed to read. And he would use that as a means of telling them what their responsibilities would be as wealthy people, as people. They were devout Baptists, went to church every Sunday. So as they all grew up and went out into the world, they took the lessons that their father had taught them very, very seriously. David said he sometimes, and this was when he was in his 90s, he sometimes still thought what his father would think of what he had done. So you can see that this was deeply impressed on him, that he had to contribute back. He had been given much, but he had to contribute back. Each of the brothers had their own area of interest and expertise. Nelson, of course, was very active in national politics, governor of New York, and a great art collector as well. Lawrence Rockefeller, in many ways the least known of them, was actually the first venture capitalist in the United States. He discovered things like the wheel. That was a joke. Yeah. But the organization that he created, for instance, invested mezzanine finance in Apple. So that was his great interest, as well as conservation. David, as a banker, he worked for the Chase National Bank, then the Chase Manhattan Bank, and left before it became J.P. Morgan and Company. But he felt that American banks and the American industrial sector, as well as Americans in the aftermath of World War II, needed to become more involved in the rest of the world. And one of the areas that David selected as a young banker, he was sent down to Cuba and Panama to look at the branches that the bank had down there. And this became a lifelong cause, was to bring the United States and the rest of the nations of the hemisphere closer together. So I'm not sure if that addressed your question.
It did. I understand he did some travel through
Yes.
the region, specifically Mexico as well. I think a second honeymoon with,
Yes.
with his wife, Peggy.
Yes.
And there was also, he had been exposed to Latin American art at a very early age as well. Is that right?
That's very correct. The famous Mexican artist, Diego Rivera, I think many of you have probably heard of Diego Rivera, and his now equally famous wife, Frida Kahlo. When Rockefeller Center was being constructed, they wanted to create murals in Rockefeller Center. And supposedly they asked Picasso and Matisse to do this, both of whom declined. But Diego Rivera was interested in doing it. In fact, he had done wonderful murals in Mexico City in the 1920s. They're still sensational even now. And I think in other places, Cuernavaca. But so he, in order to entice him to take this job, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller commissioned a painting by him and said that the Museum of Modern Art, which has just been created, would have a one-man show for him in New York. So Diego Rivera agreed to come, and the painting that he executed for Abbey was sold at auction in 2018. I forget exactly how much it brought, but it was rather significant. So David, as a junior or sophomore or junior in high school, met Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. And his mother was a great art collector, as John D. Rockefeller Jr. was. John D. Rockefeller Jr. bought Rembrandts and gigantic Gainsboroughs and so on. Abby was much more adventurous. She loved folk art, and she liked the work of contemporary artists. So to her, Diego Rivera was one of the outstanding contemporary artists. So I think that her advice to David that all art is beautiful, no matter where it's from or who's done it, is also something that stuck with him for life.
So we get into the mid-1960s now, and David has this idea to create the organizations that would become American Society and the Council of the Americas. But in order to make that happen, they needed a home. And the story of this building, for those of you who don't know it, is just as dramatic as some of the history that you're telling here. How did we end up here in this building tonight?
David's cousin, who was the only child of David's oldest aunt, genealogy can get pretty weird here, but he was a famous American, well, not famous, but an American philosopher, a very close friend of George Santayana. And they lived in Europe. She died at an early age, 1906. She had one child. That child married a fellow from Chile who was working in Paris. I think he was a consular officer, but he was also working as a couturier in Paris at that time. It was owned by, my wife told me not to tell this story, but Prince Yusupov, Prince Philip Yusupov, who was the wealthiest Russian of his time, who was also one of the murderers of Rasputin. True story. So in any case, the Marquis, the woman who would become the Marquise, they got married in 1927. George de Cuevas established the Ballet de Monte Carlo, using his wife's money and so on. He also fought the last recorded duel in France in 1947.
And presumably won?
There was only a slight wound to his antagonist in the arm, and then they both threw down their swords and embraced each other. But in any case, after the Marquis de Cuevas died, she came back and lived in New York. She had inherited money as well from her grandfather, and she, after the Soviets moved out of this building.
Right. So just to pause here,
Yes.
this building was originally a private residence,
Yes.
the Percy Pine House. And then from 1946 to, I think, 1964,
Right.
the ironies of history, this was the embassy to the United Nations mission of the Soviet Union. And the joke that everybody makes is, are there listening devices still on the walls? And the answer to that is actually yes. We found them.
You did?
We did the renovation a couple of years ago.
Interesting.
We don't know whether they were still working or who they belonged to, but they were there.
All right.
So
Very
the
good.
Marquesa lives at the time, like, if I'm not mistaken, like there.
Yes. And she,
The Soviets have just sold this place For demolition.
for demolition, and she was appalled by this grand old place on Park Avenue being knocked down, and God knows what was going to be put up in instead. So she bought the house. She didn't know what she was going to do with it. In fact, she never lived in it, never stayed in it, anything like that. But because she owned the house, and because the Center for Inter-American Relations and the Council of the Americas that David had played a role in creating in the late 1950s and early 1960s needed a place. He went to the Marchesa and convinced her to donate it to the Center for Inter-American Relations. So that's how it ended up in the hands of what is now the America Society. So it was her. I think the Latin American connection for her was equally important. She'd been married to a Chilean for many, many years. So the art and culture of the Southern Hemisphere was very important to her. And I think David explained that this would not just be a place where economists and political scientists and lawyers met, that they hoped to create a place where the arts were also featured. And I think this was very persuasive to her.
And they had work to do during those first couple months because, this place, it was not on the verge of demolition. There were actually 10 days of demolition that took place. And it took them a year and a half to get the building ready to open again because they had to rebuild essentially what had been done. Let me ask you, you've known this organization for a long time. I've worked here for 10 years. One of the things that really strikes people, and you just referenced this, is the breadth of activities that happen here. Everything from the art gallery to the music program. We have a magazine. There's the valuable work that the Council of the Americas does as well. Why is it that all of those things happen in this one place at the corner of Park and 68?
It was intentional from the very beginning. David, in addition to being influenced by his grandfather, his parents, was also very much influenced by his two of his oldest brothers. Nelson Rockefeller, who was himself deeply involved in Latin American affairs. He was the coordinator for Inter-American Affairs during World War II and sort of initiated the whole idea of cultural diplomacy. There were ballet troupes and singers and dancers, Walt Disney, anybody you can think of that was sent by Nelson Rockefeller to Latin American countries during this period, during the war. He was also the first Assistant Secretary for Latin American Affairs. So Nelson, as this great collector, he would go into an art gallery and buy everything in the art gallery. He loved art so much, so he had a great Latin American art collection as well. And his other brother, his oldest brother, John D. Rockefeller III, had participated in the negotiation of the Japanese peace treaty after World War II. The idea there was to create not just an agreement between two states, but an agreement between two peoples. And the idea of improved cultural relations between Japan and the United States was an implicit and explicit part of that peace treaty. So when John came back to the United States after working through this, he decided that he would create an organization in New York that would help further those objectives. First was the Japan Society, but later the Asia Society. So David wanted to kind of replicate what the Asia Society was doing. And so that's what he hoped to do. If you go to the Asia Society, there are a million different activities that go on there. He wanted to see the same thing occur in regard to Latin America, our closest neighbors, in New York City as well. So it takes time to build that. but I think it's getting there. You know, it's pretty close to being what he would have envisioned at the time.
Peter, my final question for you, you know, as we stand here tonight and you think about these 60 years, why in your mind is what happens in this building still relevant today?
In my experience coming here for many years, for various things, both the arts program as well as meetings on the international economic order and politics in the Southern Cone and so on. These are all issues. It's an interdependent world. And we can't wall ourselves off from what is going on in other places. The more we know about what's in the mind of Lula in Brazil or Scheinbaum in Mexico, and the Mexican people and the Argentine people, the better off, we're in a better position to make decisions. And they're in a better position to understand who we are and what we're doing. So I think that's the key to it, that there needs to be a free exchange of ideas, an effort to point out commonalities instead of differences. We're going through a very fraught period in our national life now. I think it's not the only time that that's happened. It was happening in the 1960s when David decided to go to see the Marquesa de Cuevas and get the building from her. There's a picture in Susan's office of Nikita Khrushchev and Fidel Castro. Did Fidel actually stay here?
There's some disagreement.
Okay,
He was definitely here.
Okay, but you know, certainly the concern in the United States at that time of the threat of international communism played a role in all of this, and the desire to show that there was a better way of doing it, a more sustainable way of doing it, played a role in in what was going on there. You know, in retrospect, Castro's threat may not have been particularly dangerous, but it was certainly used for other reasons. But this was also a period of time when the idea of dependency theory and import substitution as a means of economic development was very powerful and strong in Latin America. Sometimes I think that's what we're trying to do now here, the import substitution. But there it was sort of like David was a great believer in free trade, in opening up the United States economy for products from other countries, investments from other countries, as well as investments in Latin America for American businesses. So all of these things came together in a very dynamic and robust and intriguing way. And they continue to be at the very heart of what Susan and her wonderful, able colleagues are doing now.
Peter, we're so appreciative, you know, Susan and I and everybody here, of you being here tonight, of taking the time, of sharing some of these stories. A round of applause for Peter Johnson.